السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله. There we go. Let's go ahead and begin. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين وبعد. We are still in some of the najasat and the cleansing of some of the najasat. Inshallah ta'ala, we only really have a few more pages. Okay, maybe a little bit more than a few. And then, yes, probably next, in a class or two, we'll start getting into the rest of the shurut of the salah. Inshallah ta'ala, if we push a little bit hard today, we should be able to have one more class in najasat and then get into the rest of the shurut of salah and then begin in the times of salah, inshallah ta'ala. Bismillah. So the author here, we stopped at where he says, farra. And I sent today's translation to the group, inshallah ta'ala. Today's class 19. He says, لو أصاب الأرض. So that's the ground. And when he says ard, tamam, he's talking about the natural ground. Then he's going to come later and say whether it's hard or soft. Would that include things like tile and ceramic? We will see in a moment. لو أصاب الأرض نحو بول. Urine came on the ground. وجف. The word jaf here means it dried up. Whether the earth absorbed it or just with time it just evaporated basically. فصب على موضعه ماء فغمره. So, and then urine is on the ground, it dried out, or I can't see it anymore. I know it was once there. And then we poured water that covered that area of the ground. فغمره means it covered it. طهورا, it is now considered what? Clean. ولو لم ينضب or ينضب أي يغور. والغوران تمام, it means that the earth started to take in that water as well. Because remember, what did he say in the beginning? He said it dried up. And one of the forms of when you pour liquid on the ground outside, for example, is that the earth absorbs that water. So he's saying, and it did not get absorbed. Or even if that water did not get absorbed, that's okay. سواء كانت الأرض صلبة, whether the ground was hard, أو رخوة, or it was soft. As you know, if the ground is hard, it will take more time. Now you can play the same exact scenario on asphalt, and that is there was urine, and then let's just say it rained, مثلا, and the water came and it just washed over the whole entire area. The ground is considered clean. وإذا كانت الأرض لم تتشرب ما تنجست به. However, if the ground did not absorb or did not evaporate that which caused impurity, meaning the urine, because in the beginning he gave an example of urine. So imagine now there's urine on the ground and the ground did not absorb it. So now we're thinking more about like what? Hardwood, we're thinking about tiles, we're thinking about ceramic, we're thinking about marble. فلا بد من إزالة العين. Then the substance that's there, that's filthy, needs to be removed first. قبل صب الماء القليل عليها, before spilling that little bit of water to cover the area on it. Why is he saying it's a little bit of water? Earlier he said فغمره, which means that it flooded the spot, not the entirety of the ground. So if it's flooding a spot, it's definitely going to be less than the 200 liters approximately mark that we stated earlier when we said al-ma'ul kathir qullatayn fasa'idan, qullatayn and above, that's ma' kathir. Below the 200 is qullatayn. So any amount under 200 liters would be referred to as ma' qalil. So before I can throw this ma' qalil on that najasa, the ayn, the substance, needs to be removed, and then I wash away. Tamam. كما لو كانت في إناء. The same exact scenario if it is in a bucket. And we already went over the bucket incident, or najasa going into a container of water and how that works. We're not going to expand on that. You can go back to the earlier classes for that. وَلَوْ كَانَتِ النَّجَاسَةُ جَامِدَةً, But if the najasa was solid, and when he says solid here, it doesn't mean that it needs to be necessarily a rock. It could be, imagine the solidity of a bar of soap. So with time, it is slowly dissolving, but it is a solid object. Tamam. فتفتتت. Then that solid object broke apart. واختلطت بالتراب, and it mixed with the dirt. لم يطهر. Well, you can't purify that dirt with just pouring water over it. It's not going to work. Why? Because all the water will do is spread it and mix it out with the dirt. Now you have to remove a layer of that dirt. كالمختلط بنحو صديد بإفاضة الماء عليه. كالمختلط بنحو صديد, that means if there's mucus or pus or even animal flesh that's meta mixed in with the dirt now is considered what? Najis. Pouring water over it, it's not going to work. What do you need to do? بل بد من إزالة جميع التراب المختلط بها. You're going to have to remove that dirt. Now, the interesting thing about dirt is that I don't need to move 200 kilos of it. I just remove that surface of the dirt that has the najasa in it and move it elsewhere. وأفتى بعضهم في مصحف تنجس بغير معفو عنه. Some of them, meaning some of our ashab, give a fatwa in regards to a mushaf that filth has come on its pages or on its cover. بوجوب غسله, that you need to wash it. Now bear in mind, back at the time of the author and up until just maybe a couple hundred years ago, most books were written by hand. If I were to wash something, the ink goes away, including the mushaf. This would happen to. He's saying that they gave a fatwa that you would have to wash the mushaf with this najasa that's not excused, not ma'fu anhu, that needs to be washed. وَإِنْ أَدَّى إِلَى تَلَفِهِ, even if it means, or even if it causes that the words or some of the ayat get washed away. Basically, the continuation of that is once the paper dries out, you rewrite those verses. قال وَإِنْ كَانَ لِيَتِيمٍ, even if it belonged to an orphan, a yatim. You might say, why is he mentioning a yatim? This is odd. It isn't odd, because when a individual is the guardian and the caregiver for an orphan, the property of the yatim, is their responsibility until that yatim, orphan, comes of age. And anything that he does with the property of that orphan needs to be well documented, and he needs to explain himself. Every penny, every dollar, every book, every piece of clothing, and so on. If it belonged to the yatim, he needs to protect it and keep record of it, because the yatim can sue him later on the things that they own. And they're not even allowed to use the money of an orphan unless there is certain, or they've double checked on everything before they maybe like invest that money or anything like that, because it's not their property. It does not belong to the guardian. Tamam. And today we'll hear people that'll say, well, the guardian took the child in. Shouldn't he have a right? No, he doesn't have a right in what belongs to that orphan. Like a husband does not have a right with the money of his wife. If she gives him, that's from her. She decided to do that, but he has no right over her wealth. And the same thing is with an orphan. وَإِنْ كَانَ لِيَتِيمٍ, that means if that mushaf belonged to an orphan, we're going to tell the guardian, wash it. Even though it's going to remove verses, or it's going to corrupt the copy, or etc., what might happen, because there's najasa there. Tamam? He says, قال شيخنا ويتعين فرضه, meaning it might actually, you might have to clean the mushaf, it might be an obligation to wash it if there's najasa there. فيما إذا مست النجاسة شيئا من القرآن. So Ibn Hajar is saying, actually washing the mushaf, this might be an obligation. Why is Ibn Hajar saying that? He's saying, that if the najasa is touching any of the words of the Quran, this is very disrespectful. You're falling into a form of belittling the Quran by not rushing to cleanse this copy. He says بخلاف ما إذا كان في نحو الجلد أو الحواشي. He says, as opposed to maybe if it's only on the cover, this would be your ghulaf, your cover, or also known as jild, because back in the old days when they made book covers, they made it out of skin. You see, I have one mushaf that has jild, has leather. لا بأس إن شاء الله تعالى. Maybe another time I'll show it. والحواشي. Al-hawashi, it's the side parts of any book. So in the mushaf would be any blank spots off to the side. Those are called hawashi. And that's why the commentaries on books are called hawashi, because the ulama used to write their hawashi on the sides of their copies. Here's a fun fact. Most hawashi were not printed books that the mashayikh sent to be copied for people to use. Rather, hawashi were the notes written on the sides of copies of books. So they'll have the actual book and they're writing notes on the side within the book. Hawashi are two types. One type, the sheikh himself is writing it in for class, like al-Birmawi did in his copy of al-Ubab. Another type is that the student himself writes what the sheikh is saying in the book itself as they're studying the book with the sheikh. If you have a shamila, you know how to use a shamila? Open up a couple of Shafi'i Fiqh hawashi within the book. Go to the very first page of the hashiyah. You'll see that there's other people writing. You'll see, like, I believe, Umera's hashiyah. It's Ibn Qasim al-Abbadi who's writing it out. Tamam. Al-Abbadi's hawashi, they're actually written by Tablawi. So he'll say, I, Fulan Tablawi, here's the hawashi of Ibn Qasim al-Abbadi. So this is one of the beautiful things. So if you are into manuscripts and you're looking for a book through manuscripts and you're collecting copies, like I do with Minhaj al-Talibin, for example, pay attention, because if the manuscript that you find has commentary on the sides, that might be a hashiyah to a sheikh, which we might know about, and we might not know that it even existed. So always look, always explore. It's a beautiful thing. If you go back to my recordings on two copies that I own, Fath al Mu'een, Sharh Manhaj al-Tullab, I actually, in both copies, there's hawashi there. So you can actually see that firsthand, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. He says, فرع غسالة المتنجس ولو معفو عنه كدم قليل إن انفصلت وقد زالت العين وصفاتها ولم تتغير ولم يزد وزنها بعد اعتبار ما يأخذه الثوب من الماء والماء من الوسخ وقد طهر المحل طاهرات. And we already covered this. Remember on last class I said there's najasa here. I poured water over it. There was a bucket underneath. I used one exact mug, poured it over, squeezed it out. It's clean. I look at the water, hasn't changed in quantity. Maybe a couple drips that are still here, I couldn't wring them out. But this is clean. The water did not change. The water is considered clean. If this is clean and that's clean, the water is clean. If this is not clean and the water in the bucket is clean, tamam, then the water in the bucket is najis. How? Because that means the water just went, a small amount of water just went over najasa, and the najasa is still here. That's a small amount of water that came in contact with what? Najasa. And when small amounts of water come in contact with najasa, that water is najis, even if it did not change. However, if the najasa is gone, then the water has not come in contact with najasa anymore, because the movement of the water eliminated the najasa. And therefore, because this is clean and the water has not changed, then it's clean. But I want you to notice something here. He added a fourth feature. Now, we know from the features from previous classes three things: color, taste, and smell. But there's a fourth feature that they rarely speak about, except for when they speak about غسالة. غسالة is the water from after washing something away. That's called غسالة. Think about it like this. If you have a washing machine, after a load is done, you hear the water being released. That water is called غسالة. We today, in our day-to-day lives, we don't deal with a lot of غسالة, if at all. Why? Because for the most part, like in the example I just gave with the washing machine, it dumps the water away. Or I'm washing something over a sink, right? So the water's going down the drain. The water going down the drain is my غسالة. So because everything is drained like that, or I'm doing it over the ground, I don't deal with غسالة in my day-to-day life. Back then, they didn't have faucets. They didn't have drains. And the bucket of water we have in the home is the bucket of water we have for the day, unless you want to pay a few more visits to the well, and there's already a line there. So is that something you really want to do? Okay. And sometimes that bucket wasn't even enough. So when they did have to go back to the well, it's out of necessity, not out of leisure. So if I had a drip of urine here, I don't know how, I'm just using that as an example. I don't want to pay a visit to the well, and I don't want to wash the whole entire garment, because if I do, it's the only qamis that I have, and then it's going to be hung up until it dries out. It's just not practical. So what do we do? What did they do? They took a little water over a bowl or a bucket. Also, if you go back to, if you're into history, or if you go to museums, or if you research historical matters, you'll see there's something called a hand washing bowl. It had water, you put your hand in it, and you washed your hands. So you utilize these smaller containers of water to function, which meant that you would always have غسالة, water left after usage. And because this is how they lived, this is evidence for الماء المستعمل that we spoke about earlier. That even with this complexity of water, they are gathering water after washing things. They never gather water off of the limbs from when they're making wudu, which tells us that that water is not meant to be used. Tamam? So we already covered this in our last class, so I'm not going to expand this that much more. I just want you to focus on that fourth description, that is, its weight did not increase. They're utilizing weight here as an additional feature to signify maybe the najasa that moved has changed something in the water. It might have been so minor that it didn't change color, taste, and smell, but it could change, hypothetically, the weight or the look of the amount of water. That's what they mean by weight. They don't mean grab a scale. They mean if I was pouring it from a mug over a small bowl or bucket, if I were to pour it back into the mug, would it overflow it? Then an increase happened. Why did this increase happen? The only thing added here would be what the najasa, therefore I would consider it najas at that point. So I will look for that fourth description changing. But if it did not, then the water is clean. And again, this fourth description of the ma, al-wazn, only comes up in غسالة. He says, قال شيخنا ويظهر الاكتفاء فيهما بالظن. نعم. يعني, you're to the best of your assumption, you're not going to go get a scale and weigh it. No, if everything looks how I just described, then you're fine. تمام. هذا يكتفى فيه. هذا كافي. That's suffice. He says, فرع إذا وقع, and before we move forward, فرع. Now, in the beginning, I explained what kitab, what bab, what fasl means. What's فرع? It's a sub-mas'ala, a subcategory, a subsection pertaining to the types of masail that we've been speaking about. So it's similar to it. And this is about what? It's all about ways of tathir, ways of purifying things, and what happens after you do so. He says, إِذَا وَقَعَ فِي طَعَامٍ جَامِدٍ كَسَمْنٍ. Samnin is like butter. Okay, it's what Middle Easterners use mostly in their cooking. They don't use butter. They don't use oil, except to deep fry things. And you could imagine the health issues that they have from both of these substances. Please take it easy on these things. These things harm And I know so many people that are literally right now sick in the hospital because of their eating habits. If you're young, watch your eating habits now. It will make your health better as you get older. Okay. And we're not talking about necessarily longevity. I mean, we want to meet Allah, but our bodies are an amana. It's our responsibility. So make sure that you eat wisely and you verify what you're consuming and you're maintaining your health. Our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his diet was very healthy and he ran a lot and he walked a lot and he took care of his health. Mimic him sallallahu alaihi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. So he's saying if something falls into a more solid substance, and again, as I mentioned earlier, when he mentioned the something being solid, and we were speaking about the ground, I said he doesn't mean, or najasa being solid. I said it doesn't mean that it's hard as a rock. It could still break apart. And the example here as butter, for example, right? That explains that when they say jamid, they don't necessarily mean that it can't dissolve over time. They just mean that in its current state, it looks like it's hard. Tamam? If into butter or like something that appears solid, like butter, something falls into it, and here he gives an example of a rat or a mouse. فماتت, and then it dies. ألقيت وما حولها مما ماسها فقط. And this rat or mouse dies in it. You scoop its surroundings from the butter, right? And you toss that out. The rest is considered clean. تمام? والجامد هو, and here you go. Here's your ضابط. What does ضابط mean? So when we're studying fiqh, they use words and expressions. Sometimes they need a little bit of a definition to classify what they're talking about a little bit better. So the ضابط here, he says, والجامد هو الذي إذا غرف منه لا يرتاد على قرب. It is for, if I take some of it, we don't see it filling that gap. Meaning, if I have a bowl of yogurt and I take a spoonful out, if I give it a few minutes, it might level itself out. If I have a cup of water and I take a spoonful with, it doesn't leave any dent or hole in it, it automatically fills out. If I have a bowl of rice and I take a spoonful, it doesn't refill itself out, right? So I have these different types of substances. Any substance, when it comes to this hadith, and this goes back to a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he literally gave this answer, tamam, for the mouse or the rat. So the way that I'm going to gauge what is considered jamid and not is that if something doesn't fill in that spoonful that I took, or it does, but it takes a longer time to do so, then I'm going to treat it as jamid. I'm going to consider it a solid. And therefore, if a rat or a mouse falls into it, I just scoop out that which surrounds it, and I toss it out. Tamam. In al-ubab, instead of an qurb or ala qurb, he says fawran, immediately. Tamam. Which is probably, according to some, a little bit more accurate. Tamam. Allahu a'lam. He says, فرع إذا تنجس ماء البئر القليل. I have a well now. Here's another scenario. I have a well. And the water in the well, when I look down in, is qalil, is under the 200 liter. And now I'm just going to continuously mention 200 whenever qalil and kathir come up. There is a technical difference in that exact amount. I'm doing the 200 out of convenience, but I already sent everyone the conversion rates, and we spoke about that in one of the earlier classes you can return back to. إذا تنجس, now if that water that's qalil, under that 200 mark, is now najis. And when we say najis, we mean it's mutanajjis, meaning something of filth is now in it. بملاقات نجس, Why? Because something filthy fell into it. We'll just say a dead rat. It fell into that water. How do we fix this problem? He says, لم يطهر بالنزح. You cannot purify it by just removing the dead rat. But why? He says, بل ينبغي ألا ينزح ليكثر الماء بنبع أو صب ماء فيه. Rather, you shouldn't even take it out. You should give the well time to fill up, because that's what a well is, right? It's underground water filling up. So if it's currently qalil, give it time to fill up to be kathir. Tamam? Or add water to it. طيب لماذا? The reason why is that the moment that you take the rat out, the water its weight and its amount will decrease. And an increase will take a longer duration. Tamam. So keep it in, as a well is not going to stay like that for long. He says, awil kathiru. However, if the water is kathir in that well, bitaghayyurin bihi, and that dead rat caused a change in it, lam yathur illa bizawalihi. The water will not be purified until the change goes away. فإن بقيت فيه نجاسة كشعر فأرة ولم يتغير فطهور تعذر استعماله إذ لا يخلو منه دلو. He says, however, if the change goes away, tamam, but there's still some residue of the najasa that doesn't necessarily mix, like hairs of the rat, then the water is considered what? Tahirun mutahhar. Tahur means that others can use it. Why? Because it's not changed. Its characteristics have not changed. The characteristics are all still good. الطعم واللون والرائحة. Taste, color, and smell. Then what do we do about the rat hairs that are in there? We'll say تعذر. تمام. تعذر ماذا؟ يعني we're excused. However, if the hair of the rat is too much, meaning to the extent where he's describing لا يخلو منه دلو, every time I pull up a bucket of water, there's some of it in it, then what we need to do is that we need to clear out those hairs. فلينزح كله. فلينزح كله. But we want to make sure of something. We want to make sure that when we're taking those hairs out, we're not taking the water out. If the water is too close to the 200 mark. Why? Because if we drop under the 200, even if there's no change, what are we going to be left with? Najasa in contact with a small amount of water, with ma'un qalil. That would render it najis. The best choice here would be to get like a screen, right? To use almost like a filter and collect that out without impacting the quantity of water. فإن اغترف قبل النزح ولم يتيقن فيما اغترفه شعرا لم يضر وإن ظنه. Now, if it just so happens that you're still waiting to find something to filter out those hairs, and the time of prayer came and you pulled out a bucket nevertheless, and you look in the bucket and there's no of these rat's hairs there in the water, then you can go ahead and use that bucket. تمام. لماذا؟ عملا بتقديم الأصل على الظاهر. This is a long قاعدة. Okay, or before we get to the قاعدة, let's say it's an ancient debate between two realities. One reality is called an asl, and we touched base on this briefly before. We'll touch base on it again right now. One reality is called al-asl. One reality is called al-zahir. Let's explain these words. Al-aslu means the original law of something, the original rule of something. Al-zahir is the apparent based upon what I have observed that would cause me to conclude X. Not that I've seen it, but I'm concluding it. That's why we're calling it the apparent. We're not calling it the yaqeen. We're not saying it's the certainty. We're saying this is what I assume. The best example for this is you walk into a warehouse. In this warehouse, there's one bucket of water. Okay? And as you walk into the warehouse, a dog runs out the other door. And around the bucket, there's drips of water, and the water in the bucket is shaking back and forth. The apparent tells you, and this example is the best example for you to understand this issue. The apparent tells you the dog was in the water, right? Because you have water on the floor, you have the bucket of water shaking, the dog is running out the other door. As soon as you walked in, what was the dog doing? He was in the water. But did you see it? You did not see it. The original state or ruling of the water is that the water is clean for you to use. Remember, this bucket of water is under the qullatain. So we're talking about ma' qalil. The original rule is that that water is clean for you to use. There's nothing wrong with it. But the apparent, meaning the possible apparent, based upon what you are concluding from what you just saw, is that the dog was in the water. But the dog is not here anymore, so you didn't see their head in the water. You didn't see their mouth in the water. So which one do you follow? The apparent that you have concluded, or the original ruling for that water? Which one now here takes effect? This matter applies in so many different chapters of fiqh, to the extent that even ashab al-awjuh will always say in these types of issues, tamam, where the asl and the zahir are contradicting one another, they'll always say fiha qawlan. Tamam. So they'll be like, qawl says this, one qawl says follow the asl, another qawl says follow the zahir. And they're aqwal mustakhraja realistically. But aside from that point, here in this scenario, which one do I follow? The dog scenario that I gave you. Because the other qa'idah that tells us that I cannot use doubt or assumption or even possibilities to overturn certainty tells me and compels me to follow the asl in the dog scenario in the warehouse, not the apparent, not the concluded apparent. Why? Because the concluded apparent is not based upon certainty, but the state of the water is based upon certainty. Now, if you try running other scenarios of this through your head, you're only going to wind up confirming one of the two. There's no third option. Tamam. And no, in the scenario, there's no security camera. Tamam. I actually get that question quite often. We're saying, well, can we check the footage? So the point that I'm trying to make here is that you will run into this issue. Well, what about our scenario in the book? A well that we have, it has a lot of water in it. We remove the rat, but there's still rat hairs in there that we're still trying to clear out. It's time for prayer, and I'm like, Ya Rabb, I need water to make wudu. Pull the bucket in, I pull it out. I look at the bucket, there's not even one rat hair in it. Is this water clean, or is this water dirty? Now, there are so many elements involved in this. Like, for example, some of our ashab came and said, hold on. So you had ma' kathir. No change in it. So remember, none of the three characteristics have changed. And you pulled a bucket of water out of it. Well, automatically that water would be najis if there's the hair. Then other ulama said, no, it wouldn't be because the three characteristics are not changed. let me give you another example for this. Imagine there's najasa in 200 liters of water, and I pull a bucket out. That bucket is not changed. The 200 liters now are under the amount. But because I took it out, that water changed. Now both buckets are considered dirty. You see? But in our scenario, and maybe inshallah ta'ala in our fiqh deep dives, I'll give you more scenarios like that. I think the best one to get all of the scenarios in a nice way was Al-Khatib al-Shirbini in his explanation on Minhaj. So we might read over those inshallah ta'ala. Like having a bucket per bucket, and if you move water from here, when this bucket is this state, what happens to this bucket? It's very, very interesting. But let's stick to here. So you pulled that bucket out and there's no rat hairs in it. Okay. What is the asl? The asl here is that while there might be hairs over there, there's no hairs here, and therefore I'm good to go. The concluded apparent is that they're here. I just got lucky in this bucket. But I might not be seeing it because I know they're in the well. Which one do I follow? No, we're going to follow what? Al-asl, and that is the bucket of water that I have is clean. He says, وَلَا يَطْهُرُ مُتَنَجِّسٌ بِنَحْوِ كَلْبٍ إِلَّا بِسَبْعِ غَسَلَاتٍ بَعْدِ زَوَالِ الْعَيْنِ وَلَوْ بِمَرَّاتٍ فَمُزِيلُهَا مَرَّةٌ وَاحِدَةٌ. A dog drinks out of my cup. I need to wash it 7 times. One of those times I'm going to add dirt to the water and almost make it into like a paste or a mud, and then I'm going to use that and scrub my cup. However, after the dog drank, you could see his saliva all over the cup. I have to remove that. Even if I need to wash it 10 times just to remove it, removing that substance left from the dog needs to be removed first. And removal of that, that's considered 1. So now I still have 6 more washes to do afterwards. Tamam? إحداهن بتراب. تمام. بتراب عفوا تراب تيمم ممزوج بالماء. تراب تيمم, it means turab, dirt, that's طاهر مطهر. That's why it says بتراب تيمم. Turab that's good for tayammum, that's the kind of turab I need here. تمام. He says بأن يكدر الماء حتى يظهر أثره فيه. To the extent, meaning I'm going to add the amount of dirt to that water in one of the washes, to the extent where the water itself is completely dark. Tamam? يظهر أثره فيه. You see the dirt as you're using it to clean. ويصل بواسطته. The dirt moves with the water إلى جميع أجزاء المحل المتنجس. Tamam? To all of the parts where that saliva had reached. Well, is it just dark water? Is it paste? It's a little bit of both. You want it to be able to move around. I'm using the word paste because paste will move around. You don't want to get it into chunks. No, just to a paste level. Tamam. And this same scenario applies to the swine as well. No difference in them when it comes to the washing for the Shafi'iyya. وَيَكْفِي فِي الرَّاكِدِ تَحْرِيكُهُ سَبْعًا. If I don't have a faucet, but there's a lake nearby, I can put my cup in and move it back and forth. تمام. قال شيخنا, meaning Ibn Hajar, يظهر أن الذهاب مرة والعود أخرى. So if I put the cup into the lake, that's 1, that's 2, that's 1, that's 2. وفي الجاري مرور 7 جريات. But if there's a river, I can keep it under until I see 7 flows of water, 7 little waves of water moving back and forth. ولا تتريب في أرض ترابية. But if this happened on dirt, meaning there was water on the ground and a dog came and he licked and he left some of his saliva or whatever there, I don't need to add dirt to it because the ground is already dirt. I'm just going to add the water. As Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari, he says in Fath al Wahhab, he said, because adding dirt to dirt has no value whatsoever. Let me check our time, inshallah ta'ala. ممتاز. He says, فرع لو مس كلبا داخل ماء كثير لم تنجس يده. Let's just imagine you're in a swimming pool, tamam, and the water does not smell like chlorine. So it's water that's clean. طاهر مطهر. And as you're swimming, a dog jumped in to swim with you. Tamam? And you touched that dog under the water. Your hand is not considered najis. Your hand is not considered najis. Why? Because you're in water. Tamam? ولو رفع الكلب رأسه من ماء وفمه مترطب ولم تعلم ممساته له لم ينجس. Remember the example of the warehouse? So when you walked in, instead of seeing the dog run off, you see the dog's face is hovering over the water. And his mouth looks wet. But you're not sure. Was that wetness because their tongue is out the whole time? Or did they actually put their head into the water? In my scenario, the dog had ran out. You didn't see the dog's face. In this scenario, you walk in and the dog looks up at you. Their mouth looks wet. You even see some of their saliva like that. But you don't know, you did not see them put their mouth into the water. Then the water is what? Well, I do not say that the water is considered najis. قال مالك وداود Imam Malik ibn Anas and Dawood al-Asbahani, meaning the Imam of Ahl al-Zahir. He said, or they said, الكلب طاهر ولا ينجس الماء القليل بولوغه. And it does not make the water najis. Tamam? When he puts his mouth into ma' qalil, it does not make the water najis. That's what Imam Malik said, and that's what Dawood al-Zahiri said. Dawood bin Ali al-Asbahani. Well, what do they do about the hadith that we mentioned before? إن طهور إناء أحدكم إذا ولغ فيه الكلب أن يغسله 7 مرات. The Prophet said, if a dog puts his mouth and tongue into your cup or your utensil, this is how you have to wash it 7 times. One of those times is with dirt. Is Imam Malik rejecting this hadith? Is Dawood al-Zahiri rejecting this hadith? No, they're not. They say, وَإِنَّمَا يَجِبُ غَسْلُ الْإِنَاءِ بِوُلُوغِهِ تَعَبُّدًا. ما معنى تعبدا? Meaning that it's a matter of when it's consuming, you want to make sure you clean from their usage. That's all. And the reasons for this are unknown to us. They're what? They're unknown to us. We simply do this because we were told to. That's it. Tamam. The Shafi'iyya, they say, okay, well, that's not obvious from the hadith. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if he was referring to it in a ta'abbudi matter, he wouldn't use the term wulugh. Why? Because wulugh is an action. If it was matter of ta'abbudi, then he would just say, if the dog eats out of your utensils, then, wash after it, or you ought to wash after it. But he doesn't say any of that. He says, in order to purify your your utensils, from a dog doing wulugh. What's wulugh? Using its tongue and coming into contact with your utensils. He's specifying way too much. And when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam specifies, meaning gets into details, like think about it when he speaks about the cat. He wants to tell us, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he wants to tell us that the cats are clean. Everything about them is clean. Don't worry about it. All right? Why? he gives us a reason. He says, oh, they're tawafin alaykum mutawafat. They're in and out, they're doing so many things, they're cleaning themselves, it's so much going on. When he comes to speak about the dog, he specifies. He doesn't generalize like he did with the cat. If it was ta'abbudi, he would have generalized like he did with the cat. Why? Because he doesn't really give us the exact reasons why the cat is clean. So we take it at face value, unless we see najasa. Well, we just say the cat is normally clean, unless maybe in this scenario, this scenario, because of what we've seen, the najasa we have certainty of, like blood in its mouth from eating a mouse, right? But with the dog, he actually specifies. He's very direct and clear in what he's saying. And with wulugh, that has to do with its saliva, its tongue, its usage of its tongue, which we know dogs use on a regular basis for pretty much everything, as opposed to the cat. So him specifying that tells us there's more to it than it just being ta'abbudi. Tamam? So for us, that other opinion is considered da'if. It's considered weak. Now he's going to get into the rest of the ma'fuwat. One might say, hold on, didn't we just in a few pages ago, I think started it page 90 in this copy. Yeah, right here he started to speak about ma'fuwat. Why is he coming here again now? He's saying what? وَيُعْفَ عَنْ نَحْوِ دَمِ الْبَرْغُوثِ. But over there he did mention some of the things that are ma'fu anhu. He mentioned, like, for example, we said lice, right? He says here, wadam, and over here he's going to be saying, وَعَنْ قَلِيلِ نَحْوِ دَمِ غَيْرِهِ. Because over here in the beginning, he was speaking about what is najis, period. Along the way, he mentioned some exceptions to them. Here, he's actually speaking about the ma'fuwat. Tamam? Let me check our time before we get into this. I'd really prefer us, you know what? We'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala, and then that way we can knock out the ma'fuwat in one setting instead of having to go and come back. Because we technically have really touched base on almost all of this. But I would like for us to have one recording where we have this whole entire section covered in bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So I think what will probably wind up happening is that one class will just read over the ma'fuwat, which again we've already covered, and I've sent you the list. So if if you want to check that, and during our deep dive, we'll be doing the ma'fuwat. Let me show you my copy. Bismillah. Mumtaz. Here we go. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is Imam al-Ramli's فتح الجواد في شرح منظومة ابن عماد في النجاسات المعفو عنها. We're going to be going through this book, inshallah ta'ala, in our deep dive sessions. And I'm preparing all of that, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. So this is Imam al-Ramli's commentary. It's a really, really nice tahqiq. This one is done by... They don't actually have a name for their publishing house. Oh, there you go. Dar al-Karaz, which basically just means cherries. The publishing house is named Cherries. You'll just see a little cherry on it, but it's a really good copy. And the muhaqqiq does some, he does some really decent tahqiq and quotations. So we're going to be going over this. It's not that big of a book, but it will probably take us a few sessions to cover, inshallah ta'ala. Deep dive should start in the next probably next week, inshallah ta'ala. Probably say early to mid next week. Also, we have starting is Sunan Abi Dawood, which is definitely very, very exciting. But we're gonna pause here. Make sure you write waqf right here at ويعفى عن دم البراغيث if you're writing your waqf or if you have a copy. I've sent the translation out to everyone, inshallah ta'ala. And I'll let everyone go for now. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله تعالى لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.